Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For the free tutorial today, I'd like to share with you my Spiral Tassel Drop Pendant. Really easy to make, lots and lots of fun, loads of movement, really beautiful to wear. Let's head down to the board and take a closer look. So here's the pendant in question. We formed the body with a heavier gauge wire to make that large spiral. I'm then using 7 slightly larger large hole beads and 5 slightly smaller beads. I've got 5 lengths of chain and 5 head pins. Now just to talk about the items that I'm using today, I've got silver colour head pins, I've got rose gold colour smaller beads. The only proviso with those is that they will go onto your head pins and stay on your head pins. You don't want them falling off the end. So that's the head pins and smaller beads. Let's just put those up out of the way for now. In terms of chain, you could use scraps if you wanted to. Now I've gone for 5 pieces of chain that are all the same length, and the easiest way for me to achieve that is to put it on a piece of scrap wire and then just trim the link. If you prefer, you can count links, or you can also graduate from a slightly longer central piece of chain, graduating -2 links and then -2 links again on either side. I actually quite like it to be a very subtle graduation caused by the curvature of the spiral that we're going to make. So there's my 5 pieces of chain. The drops are about 2 inches, and then I have 7 of these larger whole silver colour beads. These are, I think, 5 to 6 millimeter beads, but they do have a very large hole in the centre, which means that they will move on our heavier weight wire really easily. So I have 12 inches of 1.25 gauge wire. I'm using raw copper today, and that's approximately 16 gauge. So let's start with a closed up circular form in the middle of that spiral. The end has already been flush cut, and I'm just going to turn that circle all the way around so that I can then push the cut end of the wire into the wire that's moving away and around, and in that way it shouldn't kind of catch on things when you're wearing it. Then what we're looking to do is to create a spiral. You can graduate the distance between the wires as you move round so that it gets slightly larger every single time you make a circuit, or you can keep going at the same kind of distance and size all the way through and then just open it out on the last spiral. It's absolutely up to you, but do take your time. You see here that I've closed it up a little bit so I can easily open that up, and then we're going to move that around, leaving approximately 3 to 4 inches of wire coming away from the spiral. So we started with about 12, perhaps even 14 inches if you want to make a very large spiral. The longer you take when you're creating spirals, the neater they will be. So I'm just going to kind of rush through it a little bit today. And even though we are using a harder wire, a firmer wire, we can absolutely also hammer that form when we've finished creating the spiral. Don't hammer the bit up at the top though, because we're going to need that to remain flexible to add our bail up at the top. So just keep going and going and going until you get a spiral of the size that you're looking for. You can fast forward through this bit if you like. What we're looking to do is to have that last section be slightly more open. So you might need to just open that out a little bit if you go awry, and you can also re-warm the wire if you need to, remembering to stop spiralling with a good sort of 3 or so inches at least on the end, so that we can make a little wrapped loop and a return halo up at the top. So I think probably 4 inches of wire up there at the top, coming away without anything on it, is probably a smart idea. Now you can see that I've spiraled and spiraled, and then the last loop all the way around has a much larger gap, and that's because it will enable me to add on my beads and my little scraps of chain. So let's just drop those off the wire scrap for a second. And we're going to start off with one of our beads and then add a piece of chain until we have loaded on 6 beads and 5 sections of chain. If you want to make this very much larger, for instance, if you wanted it as a wall hanging rather than jewellery, or you just want really big jewellery, then of course you can mess around with the numbers to your heart's content. What I would say though is that it's always a good idea to have odd numbers of chain, and therefore also odd numbers of beads, because it means that you will have a central piece hanging down in the middle, And that always looks really, really attractive in jewellery, to have that kind of symmetry going on. You could go for just 3 pieces of chain. You could go for odd pieces of chain if you wanted to. But I do like the way that they delicately cascade to be longest in the middle. The nature of this in my demonstration piece, all the chain is the same length, but the middle one looks a bit longer because it's at the lowest point of the spiral. So once you've got 6 beads and 5 lengths of chain on, they will start to dangle down. Now, before you add these on, what you can do if you desire is hammer the spiral section up to around about here before we're going to start making that bend in just a second. In terms of materials, I really love working with different colour metals today. So I've chosen to work with raw copper for my spiral. I've got silver colour beads, silver colour chain, silver colour head pins, but then I've added rose gold colour beads at the bottom of the chain just to add some extra weight and dangliness to allow that wire, that chain to cascade neatly. So you can play around with your wire and metal colours to your heart's content and make something that looks completely different. You could add on really, really fancy beads or even gemstones down at the bottom of those head pins if you like, or just leave it as naked wire. Absolutely up to you. For the next part of today's tutorial, we're going to create an upright. Now, I often look for the start point on my spiral and match where the upright comes away. So you can see the start point of the spiral is just here. I would quite often put a turn up at the top there. Now that will give me a really nice cascading effect with my chain. So I think that's probably what I'm going to do today, but you don't have to if you don't want to. You can allow that to begin and end wherever you'd like it to. Just do make sure that you take that into consideration if you are going to hammer the form before you add those beads. I've done quite a lot of hammering with you recently, so I elected not to show you the hammering today. However, before you add your beads on, just make sure that you're supporting the whole of the form to keep it in position whilst you hammer sections at a time. So I've decided that's where my bend is going to be, and I'm going to turn that into a wrapped loop up at the top with a little extra haloing. So you may notice that there is a single bead left over. We started with 7 beads and 5 pieces of wire, and the reason for that is I wanted to add one in the neckline of the piece as well. So for the time being, it's quite likely, because it's a large hole bead, just to floop around and get on your nerves. Don't worry about it. We'll fix that in a moment. What we're going to do is to allow a couple of millimetres either side of where that bead will sit at the top of the spiral before it turns into that wrapped loop which acts as a bail. You might like to take a moment just to make sure that that is nice and straight, you're happy with the angle before you do anything else. So to form our bail, let's just make sure that's coming away at the right angle. That looks better. To form our bail, we're going to need a loop that comes forwards and away from the spiral. So just holding that in position and creating a bit of a bend. So if we hold the bead in position for a second, that will enable us to get probably 2 wraps of wire either side of that bead really nicely, just giving it a bit of a highlight. So I'm now going to grab my bail making pliers, and I think I'll go for number 4 on that one, and just get a good solid round form to act as a bail through which we can add our chain. Don't worry about the bead sliding off into infinity for the time being. It's much more important to work on getting that round form actually round. So I've slightly fludged that today. We're not going to worry about it. Fludged isn't a word, but never mind. Make sure that you're happy with the angles and that your round form sits neatly at the top of your neck piece of wire. So I'm going to really firmly support across that round shape and give that one wrap all the way around before bringing that over. So I think that's 1.5 wraps or 2 visible wraps, and then we'll rescue our bead, put it back into the position that we want it to sit. So by this time your wire will have seen a little bit of work and it will have got a tiny bit stiff. So let's give that a little bit of a warm through. Make sure that it is ready and receptive to do the things we want it to do. So holding your bead in position on the neckline of your design, you can choose to bring the wire from the top of the core to the top of the core. I quite like it when they go diagonally, so I'm just going to draw that around and underneath. Your beads will whiz around and get on your nerves for the time being. Don't worry about it. They'll all sit when gravity assist is on. So bringing that underneath the neckline bead, I've created a little bit of a halo. Now you can draw that really, really close to your bead if you want to, or you can hold it in position and just wrap that tail around. Now because we've got quite a little bit of wire left over, if you want to, you can add a second spiral, or you can simply wrap the wire around. Look, we might even get a third wrap of wire into position. It's entirely up to you what you do when you've got a little bit of bonus wire to work with. I think I'm just going to take that to the rear side, tidy it up slightly, and I might possibly bring that over to the front and put another spiral on. No, actually I think I'm going to leave that as it is. So you've got two visible wraps of wire above and below that bead. Make sure that they sit neatly and you're happy with how everything is coming together before you cut that excess away. Now a piece of wire like this is still very, very useful, so that will go into my scrap pot. Make sure that you're cutting the right bit of wire, and I'll find a use for that later, probably making a teeny tiny spiral to add on as an extender chain dropper. On the rear side of the design now, we're just neatening up how that wire sits before we return the piece down to the board for a moment. Now I actually quite like the way this looks without any droppers on it, but I will show you in the next segment how to add those little drops if you want. The beauty of making your own jewellery is that you can customise it endlessly. So whether you choose to add the little beads down at the bottom of that chain, it adds a bit of weight, makes it swing really nicely in wear. These make awesome earrings as well if you like myself, large earrings. However, just with the chain drops, it also is very attractive. So you have lots of choices about how you can customize this piece. Let's head back down to the board and I'll show you how to add those teeny tiny beads at the bottom of the chain now. So I have 5 head pins and 5 slightly smaller beads. As I mentioned earlier, really the only proviso is that your beads both fit on the head pin and do not fall off the head pin. You could use really fancy head pins. You could add in a gemstone bead or a bead of your choice. Do whatever you fancy. So what I tend to do when creating a design like this is grab all 5 of these, make a mental note of where I'm holding on my chain nose pliers, or use chain nose pliers that you can put a mark on if you prefer, and then I'll get them all set up. I'll just do 2 to show you what I mean. Let's grab another one of those beads, slide the bead on down, and then just get them like a little mini production line all set up so that they're the same size, the bend is the same gap from the bead. So get all of those done, and then grab yourself either round nose pliers or your multi-step bail makers. And then we're just going to make a round loop up at the top of that angle change. And again, I'd go through all 5 of them to make sure that that loop is the same size on each piece. And then I would take in turn to add onto the base of those chains. Now your alternative is to put this onto the chain before you add them to the spiral piece. Doesn't really matter, it's just as fiddly whichever way you do it, to be honest. So let's grip across that round form we've just created, making sure we're not crushing the chain nor where the wire crosses over that forms part of that head pin. And then give that a really nice firm turn into position. And I think I should probably get about 3 wraps on the base of this design. Trim that away. And it should, by the time you've messed around with it, just got that to sit really neatly. Tuck the end away. Make sure that that first loop is nice and tidy. Give that a squish and a squeeze. Now, a word of warning. I've had head pins from various sources over the years, and occasionally that little ball on the end, they're called ball end head pins. Sometimes if you put too much pressure on your wrapping here, that ball can pop off. So make sure you've got a handful spare if you're unsure of where you got them from. The ones that I have at the moment are absolutely fabulous, but if you're working with old stock, just bear in mind that you probably want to have a couple spare just in case disaster strikes. So let's just lie this piece down. And you'll go through the process and add each one of those 5 little bead drops. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Don't forget, completely customizable. Do it your way. Use your colours, use your favourite designs. You can alter how long the fringe is, obviously. As long as they're all sort of in a cascade, it's going to look beautiful. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate your support. Have a beautiful day. Bye for now.